The influence of George Soros here in Europe is more powerful than in the United States. Go! This is his main hunting area.
Hungary is a serious and modern country that cares about its own citizens.
George Soros is a well-known name and brand here in Hungary.
Hungary has no desire to destroy itself.
Globalism, liberalism, open borders. Soros is the man who stands for all that.
He represents everything which is not good for this country.
The United States should find its proper place in a new world order.
Because he's Hungarian, they identify him as their enemy.
There's a reason the world's creepiest NGOs hate Hungary.
Family, nation, Christianity, human dignity, in the mind of the Hungarians is belonging to the same place.
Are you religious? No. Do you believe in God? No.
George Soros is a billionaire currency trader who has spent decades waging a kind of war, political, social, and demographic war, on the West. Through Soros' network of non-governmental organizations, he spent billions trying to eliminate national borders, to oust democratically elected leaders, and install ideologically aligned puppets into positions of power. Soros' efforts have been remarkably effective. In the United States, he has installed radical prosecutors who refuse to enforce the law. In Europe, he's tried to topple democratically elected governments in Georgia, Romania, and Ukraine. He spent vast sums of money encouraging Europe and the United States to accept millions of foreign migrants. Despite Soros' best efforts, one unlikely country is fighting back. That country is Hungary, the very place George Soros was born. Here's how they're doing it. Just landed in Budapest, capital of Hungary, on the Danube in Central Europe. It's about the size of Indiana, about the population of Michigan. Like the Midwest, it's pretty flat here. This is an outpost of Western civilization in the middle of Europe. The first thing you notice when you get to Budapest, the capital of Hungary, is that it's different from what you're used to. The airport is covered in ads paid for by the government encouraging people to have big families. The architecture is old and well preserved. It's beautiful. There's graffiti on the streets, but it's mostly conservative. Hungarians and the people who run their country feel tremendous pride. They have a strong sense of identity, and that's hard-earned. Like a lot of buildings in the central square in Budapest, on the Pest side of the Danube, there are bullet holes, and they are a reminder of how many times this country has been dominated by foreign powers. Unlike the U.S., which is separated from the rest of the world by two big oceans, Hungary has no natural geographic barriers. It's on a plain, a flat basin, anyone with an army can roll through, and over the past 800 years, many armies have.
There are only about 9 million of these people, Hungarians, in the world, and they have a long experience of being occupied. The Ottoman Turks, Muslims, occupied them several hundred years ago. They were under the fingers of the Habsburg Empire. After World War I, the Trianon Treaty was imposed on them by the victorious Allies, which severed 2/3 of Greater Hungary away from the ethnic Hungarian part. And then, after World War II, they were occupied by the Soviets and ruled by the communists for another 40 years. So these are people who know what it's like to have their country under foreign domination.
Foreign threats today are different. They're not necessarily foreign armies, they're NGOs, in many cases led by George Soros.
Viktor Orban and the Fidesz party have correctly identified him and what he stands for as a threat to Hungary's national sovereignty.
He is a serious actor of the Hungarian politics.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban met with us in his library for an interview.
He has a network, more than 60 organizations here in Hungary, supported by him regularly, all against the government.
More than 60?
More than 60, all against the government.
But he doesn't live here.
Sometimes he is, sometimes not.
Orban has been in politics for 30 years, but he seems surprisingly normal. He often drives himself to work. He has dinner in Budapest without security. Every Thursday, he spends the day reading.
Viktor Orban is a very serious politician and an intellectual. He's the sort of man, the sort of political leader who has taken these populist nationalist instincts and turned them into effective policy.
Orban rose to global prominence in the late 1980s as a student anti-communist political reformer. At the time, Orban was a Soros protege. He attended Oxford University on a Soros Foundation scholarship. But as his political career progressed, so did his views. Orban became a Hungarian nationalist. He and George Soros became bitter enemies.
So we're in downtown Budapest, and what you see here is a sign saying, "Will George Soros attack our country again?" He is the condensed symbol of everything the Hungarian right hates.
George Soros is a very talented Hungarian man anyway. But we are not only talented for good things, but we are talented for bad things as well. So he is that kind of man who did not respect the tradition of this country. He has a philosophical, ideological conviction, and they would like to force it on us to follow his track, to transform our life.
Unlike the threat from the Soviets or the Ottoman Empire, the threat posed by George Soros and his nonprofit organizations is much more subtle and harder to detect. Soros creates powerful storylines by laundering his political opinions through the NGOs he finances. These positions are then repeated uncritically and with high levels of aggression by media around the world.
Why is everyone afraid of an 86-year-old man?
So who is George Soros, and why do Republicans find him so scary?
It's getting near Halloween, so I want to start by trying to scare you, okay? Ready? George Soros. Does that spook you?
Some of the critiques of him are flat out anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitic.
And anti-Semitism.
His Jewishness.
The media dutifully push George Soros' agenda on immigration and culture, while at the same time defending him from all criticism. They claim any attack on George Soros is anti-Semitic. Soros himself is an opponent of Israel.
Your prime minister has been accused of stoking anti-Semitism through the way he's dealing with George Soros. Do you regret then attacks and slurs against George Soros?
He called my prime minister a maniac. He called our country a mafia state. So my question is that if he attacks us like that, with money, with media, with funding opposition or at least NGOs in the country, why shouldn't we have the right to react? It has nothing to do with his religion, nothing.
Soros opposes Orban because Soros opposes nation states. It's not a coincidence that Soros's flagship NGO is called the Open Society Foundation. The best way to transform a country is to open it up to the world. In 2015, Soros got his chance to play a role in transforming the entire continent of Europe.
The refugee debate is very hot right now.
The refugee crisis putting Europe on edge.
Leaked documents show that in 2015, Soros spent huge amounts of money on pro-refugee propaganda, which then appeared in global media outlets. Soros also lobbied European governments directly to get them to open their borders to impoverished people from around the world. And they did.
Wir schaffen das. Wir schaffen das.
We are proposing that Britain should resettle up to 20,000 Syrian refugees over the rest of this parliament.
Migration has to be legalized.
Britain is a country of extraordinary compassion.
I want to once again commend Angela for courageous leadership.
Ich sage ganz einfach, Deutschland ist ein starkes Land.
Of up to 1,000 men groping, often robbing women.
Always standing up for our values.
Crime and violence skyrocketed. So did rape. Overnight, Western Europe was transformed. Alone among nations, Hungary said no.
Orban refused to let them stay in Hungary.
We're approaching a secret military base on the outskirts of Budapest. Pest.
Most European Union member states belong to an area called the Schengen Zone. They have an agreement that allows for free passage across European borders of migrants. Hungary is on the southern edge of that zone. That means it's the first country that migrants arrive at when they walk from the Middle East. In 2015, hundreds of thousands of migrants showed up at the Hungarian border. Viktor Orban had a simple solution: build a fence and enforce the country's laws. Hungary is not the richest country in the world. It's not even the richest country in Central Europe. And somehow they managed to build a border wall in about 20 minutes. Hungary began building the fence in June of 2015. By September, it was done. Illegal crossings immediately dropped to almost zero.
You can see a military installation on the right side. This is where the quick reaction forces and the military personnel going out to the border.
Well, they're serious about their border. No. It's not a high-tech border wall. It's a double fence with a road in the middle. But the difference is they're willing to protect it. They're not kidding. It's their border. They control it because they're a country. It's also really pretty.
There we go.
The other thing you notice is because they control the border, it's not filthy. I mean, this is nature and it's not been spoiled. There's not graffiti or garbage or people lying in heaps on the ground.
Okay.
Because the border's controlled, there's not a humanitarian disaster. Chaos creates humanitarian disaster. People suffer, they die. They expire of dehydration in the desert. They get raped by coyotes. That's not happening here. When this was not controlled, they had close to 200,000 migrants from Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, and countries not even in Europe. Cuba, for example, fly to Serbia and then walk across. The government official described it as like a travel agency. Serbia was in effect acting as a travel agency for the world's poor. You know, they're not just protecting their own interests, but the interests of the rest of the continent. Unfortunately, the leadership of the rest of the continent isn't on board because they hate themselves. For daring to defend his own country, the European Union punished Viktor Orban and Hungary.
Just seeing live pictures of the buffer zone on the Hungary-Serbian border.
Hungary decided to build what they call a technical obstacle. This is not requested by the European Union.
The EU is currently proceeding with Article 7, which could invoke disciplinary action and the suspension of some EU membership rights. I mean, how does Hungary feel being sanctioned by the EU itself?
We are not.
As usual, Orban's government held the line.
How many people are you now catching trying to come across your southern border?
From January, 50,000 people tried to make it to reach the territory of the European Union, but all of them were stopped by the fence and the whole system.
How many? Oh, all of them. You don't think any made it?
No, not at all.
Pretty great.
100% secure.
More than 1.3 million people from nations across the globe, Africa and the Middle East, claimed asylum in Europe in 2015. Often they were coached on how to enter by Soros-funded NGOs.
Yeah, I think we should put that up.
Hungarian Border Patrol took us on a tour of the fence.
So there was a huge debate in the United States about how to build our border wall and how high-tech should it be. This is an effective border barrier, and it's not high-tech. There are three components. The top is concertina wire, which has been manufactured for an awful lot since the First World War. The second is the electrified fence, which goes up about maybe 4.5 feet. And this is the third part. These two wires, these two black wires, are motion sensors. And so when this fence moves, whether a roebuck, a deer ran into it, or a migrant from Syria is trying to climb over it, it triggers the cameras, and in the observation center, the personnel can tell whether it's a person or an animal, and if it's a person, they dispatch border guards immediately.
Officers are stationed every few miles. When migrants attempt to cross, agents arrive almost immediately. While we were at the border, 2 migrants attempted to cross.
So we just got word that migrants have been apprehended at the border, so we're going to go check it out. All right, so these are the migrants who were just nabbed at the border. They say they're Syrians. We know that in previous waves of migration, the majority of people have not been from Syria. They're coached by the NGOs, essentially trying to overthrow the Hungarian government and by human smugglers to claim that they're from Syria because then they can get refugee status, but we don't know where these guys are from.
In a matter of moments, they were apprehended, processed, photographed, and then removed. They were escorted through a doorway back into Serbia. The message was simple. Hungary is a serious country that enforces its own laws.
So we have difficulties and serious challenges. First of all, first direction we got the challenges from is migration. The second one is the natural decline of the number of our population. And the question is, what is the solution?
Birth rates are declining. That's true in this country as well. It's true in Europe. The populations are literally disappearing. Most governments ignore this trend or instead import new citizens from the rest of the world.
But we don't like that approach because we would not like to, after our personal life, we would not like to leave this country to the migrants. We would like to leave it to our grandchildren.
Virtually alone among Western countries, Hungary has addressed the problem directly with a family policy. How to convince Hungarians to get married and have children? That's a major concern of the Orban government.
They want to conserve Hungarian sovereignty And family policy is a big part of that. They know that there will be no Hungary in the future if we're not creating Hungarians right now.
Katalin Novak is Hungary's family minister. It's her job to figure out how to do it.
We don't think that we have to import children in order to be able to overcome our demographic difficulties, but we think that we just have to concentrate on helping our own people to be able to raise their children.
Novak is a trained economist. She's also a mother of 3.
The issue is very simple. Does it cost a lot of money to raise children? Yes. Do we have to support those who are raising children in a responsible manner? Yes. Our answer is yes. So we would like to enable young couples to be able to have as many children as they want to in the moment when they want to have them.
As with the solution to the border crisis, the plan to increase the Hungarian birth rate is simple. Reward people who'd like to have children.
So if we have a young couple and they want to raise children together, they can get a credit without an interest rate. It's quite a large amount of money. It's 10 million forints, which means like $30,000. You don't have to pay it back if you will have 3 children.
And they are willing to violate free market dogmas for the sake of defending the country.
So we totally write off your student loan if you have 3 children. We have a full exemption, lifelong, from personal income tax paying for mothers with at least 4 children. You also get a housing subsidy. If you want to buy a car, a 7-seater, if you have 3 children or the 3rd child is on the way, then you are eligible for this support.
One morning we went to a car dealership on the outskirts of Budapest to see if the incentives were working. While we were there, we met one mother who was shopping for a new car.
She going to be 4. Szóval mi azért érkeztünk ide, mert szeretnénk egy családi autót vásárolni, illetve arra váltani.
Hi, I'm Mark Schiller. Nice to meet you.
The salesman told us sales have skyrocketed.
So before this policy came out, buying a new car for these families was not an option.
Demographics are a hard thing to change. Hungary's birth rate is still not above replacement. But Novak says it will take years for family policy to yield results, and so far, every early indicator is promising.
We have the highest increase in the birth rates in the whole European Union, which is 24% in the last 10 years.
I have 4 kids.
Sabo Balas is the mayor of Felsurs, a small town in western Hungary.
My wife, who have 4 kids, he is exempt from personal income tax. We just bought a car last year before Christmas, so that was the Christmas gift from the government.
For many mothers, government programs are the difference between having the family they want and not having children at all.
How many kids do you have? We have 3 daughters.
Have the family policies benefited your family?
Absolutely.
When I was a kid, Hungarian families used to have 2 children. In my childhood in the 80s and 90s, I did not know any families with 3 or 4 kids. But when the second child was born, we felt that our family was still not complete. A large family is considered to be one that has at least 3 children. And then we decided, why not? That's it.
Are you happy you had so many?
I'm happy I'm through with it. Because the children is the future.
We heard that sentiment echoed throughout the neighborhood.
How many children do you have?
We have 5 children.
To Hungary it is important because the future of a society is based on the children, on their development. The children are the future. And to us, this is a blessing.
Welfare policies in the United States reward single parenthood, not in Hungary. Novak has shaped Hungary's family policy to encourage marriage.
In the developed countries, the marriage rates are in general decreasing, not in Hungary. In Hungary, the marriage rate right now is twice as high as it used to be 10 years ago. So that means that it is the highest increase in the European Union as well.
Instead of paying people not to work, in Hungary, the program is contingent on working.
So you have to contribute yourself, you have to do your own part, but if you do so, if you work, then you will have all the potential support in order to be able to have a family, to have kids.
Én nagyon aggódok Magyarország kapcsolatban, és nagyon sokat gondolok Magyarországra.
The success of Hungary's border and family policies has infuriated George Soros, as well as many other Western leaders.
Orban known for his autocratic practices.
White, Christian, ethno-nationalist.
Staunchly anti-immigrant.
Viktor Orban, a right-wing authoritarian.
Orban is kind of a tragic figure, authoritarian tendencies.
Soros has joined forces with officials in the European Union to undermine democracy in Hungary.
The Brazilian bureaucrats, they are lovers of the global approach. They don't like the national identity. They think that national identity belongs to the past.
You believe you know better than Hungarians what they need. You are here today at the head of the most corrupt government, which is here in the EU.
There is indeed, an obsession with Hungary.
Rodrigo Ballester held senior positions in the EU's bureaucracy for 2 decades. Recently, he moved to Hungary.
I spent the last 17 years of my life in Brussels, mostly as a European Union civil servant.
Leaked documents show that George Soros' Open Society Foundation maintains a list of hundreds of, quote, reliable allies in the EU Parliament. That list includes committee heads, vice presidents, even a former president of the European Parliament.
There is absolute lack of political diversity among the civil servants of the European Union.
Not surprisingly, the EU has waged war on Viktor Orban for his nationalist positions.
Hungary is systematically portrayed as, the black sheep of the European Union. When I decided to move here, I think half of my colleagues looked at me as if I was moving, to North Korea or a place like that.
Reporters Without Borders, a shill organization partly funded by George Soros, provoked an EU attack on Orban by accusing him of silencing opposition media.
Once in a party, I met a colleague of mine who told me openly that in Hungary, the Orban was jailing journalists, something that never ever happened.
Attempts to curb the free media.
He's gone to war with the media.
It's fake. It's a lie. I went to the place where the papers are distributed, and I asked the shopkeepers to give all the papers which are criticizing me. It was like that, far more against us than for us. So it's obvious on an everyday experience, the media is critical to the Hungarian government.
Orban's party, Fidesz, has used its parliamentary supermajority to crack down on Soros-backed NGOs. In 2018, they passed something called the Stop Soros Law that made it a felony to aid or abet illegal immigration. That law infuriated the international media.
There is this growing phenomenon of illiberal democracy.
These measures convinced the Open Society Foundation to close its office in Budapest. Globalist organizations around the world describe the law as vicious and a, quote, calculated assault on civil society.
The battle between George Soros and Viktor Orban is a contest of ideologies, and it's far from over.
The Western liberals cannot accept that inside the Western civilization there is a conservative national alternative which is more successful at the everyday life, at the level of than the liberal ones. That's the reason why they criticize us.
So your success is a challenge to their worldview. In the spring of 2022, Hungary will hold parliamentary elections. Despite what you hear in American news outlets, Orban is not an autocrat. In fact, he stands a decent chance of losing.
So what we have done here in this country with the family policy, the national pride and all that kind of things, it must be enough to convince the people that there is a reasonable decision to support us and not to give the country to George Soros.
The Hungarian elections will be the defining battle in the war between George Soros and Viktor Orban, in the battle between globalism and nationalism. Are you worried that there will be international interference in your election in Hungary?
That will happen. I'm not worried of that. We are prepared for that. Obviously, the international left will do everything what they can do, probably even more, to change the government here in Hungary.
At the beginning of this episode, we posed a simple question. Just how do you defeat George Soros? The answer turns out to be simple. You need leaders who love your country, who care about its future and the people who live there. You need leaders who are willing to fight.